All right, that's a little better. My name is Eli Dvorkin. I'm the editorial and policy director at the Center for an Urban Future. It is such a pleasure to see all of you here today. Let me just mention a quick note of housekeeping up front. Lunch was a little delayed in getting to us today. It is already starting to emerge on that table back there. Lunch will be in a brown bag. You can just grab a bag and bring it to your seats. There will be more coming very, very shortly, so stay tuned. And we just apologize for the delay, but understand that when the food arrives, if and when the more bags arrive, feel free to get up, grab something to eat, come back to your seat. We totally get it. You're welcome to do it. We want to make sure everybody is fed and hydrated and here for a great conversation. So without any further ado, let me briefly just introduce what we're up to here today. I'm so thrilled to see so many amazing New Yorkers here in the room today. We are also joined by over 270 folks on our live stream. So hello to all of you. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited about the enthusiasm for this conversation today. As I mentioned, I'm Eli Dvorkin. I'm the editorial and policy director at Center for an Urban Future. For those of you who don't know us or know us so well, we are an independent, nonprofit research and policy think tank focused on creating a stronger and more inclusive economy in New York. And when I think about what is going to achieve that, to put forward research-backed ideas for creating the economy in New York that we'd all like to see today, I think the arts plays an absolutely critical and outsized role in that conversation. Thank you for that. We're all here today because we believe that the arts conversation can't just be focused on the budget for the New York State Council on the Arts. It can't just be focused on what the state does specifically to support the arts and artists. It has to be a broader conversation, a bigger conversation, and it deserves to be because artists are contributing across every corner of the state to the economic, the social, and the cultural life of New York. They're doing it with limited or too few resources, with a lot of growing headwinds, but artists are succeeding where so many other efforts have really struggled to breathe life into our state across every single corner of New York. And we want to shine a light on what the impact of that work has been and what the state can do to harness it, to support it, to strengthen it, to ensure that the impact that the arts is having already across New York can be even greater, more inclusive, more effective going forward. We could not do this work without the incredible support of our partners here today, Creatives Rebuild New York. Yes, absolutely. I want to thank them for making this event possible, for all the work that Creatives Rebuild New York has done over the past 3 years to uplift the arts in every part of our state and the work of artists, and to demonstrate what's possible when we provide artists with the resources needed to realize their fullest potential. So Creatives Rebuild team, thank you all so much. And a big thank you to my team at the Center for an Urban Future, Stephanie, Sophia, Rachel. You guys all made today possible and brought it to life. So thank you all for everything you do. Let me mention just a couple things about our work at the Center for an Urban Future. First, we have been writing about the arts since the beginning, for almost 30 years now. We, like CRNY, really believe that New York isn't New York without artists, and that artists and the state's vibrant arts and culture sector are playing a hugely outsized role in sparking local economic vitality, slowing and even turning around decades of population losses, and strengthening communities in the wake of numerous local, national, and global challenges. And in recent years, artists and the state's cultural sector have been succeeding where so many larger and better resourced efforts have struggled. Employment in the arts and culture sector has surged across upstate New York, in particular, up 39.3% from 2013 to 2023, nearly 15 times the overall rate of employment growth upstate. And likewise, the culture sector grew 26.5% in New York City during that time, nearly double the city's overall rate of job growth. Working artists are among the few segments of the population consistently growing upstate. In fact, the resident artist population grew 21% across upstate New York and 16% in New York City over the past decade, a time when many New York cities have seen little overall population growth, and the under 65 population actually declined. So the growth of the arts and culture sector is breathing new life into downtowns, encouraging entrepreneurs to start new businesses and expand existing ones, spurring the development of desperately needed new housing, and incentivizing young people who grew up or earned degrees locally to stay in their communities and put down roots. But the challenges facing artists in the cultural sector have also grown during this time, and new threats are arising, including the prospect of near total divestment from Washington, D.C. Wages for artists and cultural workers have failed to keep pace with rising costs in every county of the state. The disparities are particularly steep for artists and cultural workers of color. Likewise, organizations led by and serving Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color were disproportionately likely to close during the pandemic and face significant structural barriers to accessing capital, technical assistance, and other resources. And while artists and arts organizations have been getting the job done where so many have struggled, they've done so with limited public support. For instance, the primary grant-making budget for the New York State Council on the Arts fell 35.6% over the past 15 years after adjusting for inflation. Fortunately, the state has stepped up funding to NYSCA in the past 2 budget cycles, but even this additional $40 million in operating grants that have flowed through NYSCA has failed to keep pace with the overall decline in NYSCA's grant-making budget. It's about a third lower even after those increases over the past 2 years than it was in 1990. At the same time, funding for the National Endowment for the Arts to New York has dwindled over the past 4 decades and is likely to fall significantly further. Still, New York's direct investment in the arts is just a drop in the bucket compared to the state's investments in economic development tools, which too often overlook the arts sector. Just a small fraction as recently as 2021 of dollars flowing through the state's regional economic development councils went to projects that had any relation to arts and culture, just 3.7% in 2021. But this is beginning to change. Since we published that figure in our Upstate's Creative Spark report, we've analyzed the most recent rounds of grants from the regional economic development councils and seen that the share that have gone to arts and culture projects has increased to 10% and then most recently to 18%. That's a significant change. But going forward, the state needs to seize more opportunities just like that one, to weave support for artists and the arts across government. To help lay out an agenda to do just that, we've convened an amazing group of speakers, of artists and arts leaders and policymakers from across the state today. And I am so looking forward to diving into helping to shape an arts agenda for the state with this amazing group and with all of you in the room and all of you watching online today. Thank you so much for being here. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Sarah Calderon, Executive Director of Creatives Rebuild New York. And if our panelists could come and join me on the stage, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Center for Urban Future. Let's see, so over the past 3 years, I'm Sarah from Creatives Rebuild New York, I should mention that. So over the past 3 years, Creatives Rebuild New York has done many things to support artists' lives and livelihoods across New York State. Born of the Reimagine New York Commission in 2021, CRNY used its $125 million philanthropic investment to deliver guaranteed income, $1,000 a month of unrestricted cash for 18 months to 2,400 artists across the state, and jobs for 300 artists for 2 years with $65,000 a year salaries, benefits, and funds for collaborating community-based organizations. Through all of this, we learned that our work should not only be reacting to the losses of the pandemic, but really needed to be proactive. We needed to imagine a world where artists can thrive. A key to understanding how and why came from data that we collected from 13,000 artists across New York State in our Portrait of New York State Artist Survey. Here's what we found, and I'm hoping that today we can keep this in mind as we approach these panels. Artists are earning significantly less than the average New Yorker. 85% of respondents had a household income of less than $50,000. 57% had a household income less than $25,000. And as a reminder, the median New York State household income is $81,000. Nearly 2/3 of artists don't have a financial safety net. 62% of respondents had no emergency savings, putting them on the brink of financial catastrophe. And almost half of artists are gig workers. 46% of respondents relied on gig work to earn an income, and as many of us in the room and virtually know, gig work often comes without the labor protections of full-time employment, everything from health insurance to unemployment insurance. So beyond learning if our interventions, the guaranteed income and our employment program, had an impact, and they did, I should point everyone to our website where you can learn more about our recent research that we've released about the amazing impact of this work. We realized that we need to consider policy as a way to sustain some of the work that we've done. In partnership with HRNA, we met with amazing colleagues, many of them who are in this room today, thank you, across the state to create a policy playbook. And what we came up with together was a policy playbook that went across sectors. It talks about 5 broad areas of need and opportunity, and to start with, economic development, labor, housing and financial security, workforce development, and then arts and culture. So again, not leading with arts and culture, but including it, but really understanding that the cross-sector work could really help with the precarity of the creative workforce. As an example of that, one of the things that has been talked about in that playbook is portable benefits, right? So portable benefits for gig workers, many of whom are artists, could really address a critical need for folks who are working in these ways. We believe that all of the work in our policy playbook also needs to be cemented with a creative economy plan that works holistically and intentionally across all of these sectors, a plan that will thread all of the work, not make it piecemeal, and demonstrate a true commitment to our creative workers and our artists. We hope that the state takes the momentum of other states like Delaware and Illinois, Washington, California, and Massachusetts, and thinks about a creative economy plan, and that artists are the key to that creative economy plan. We are excited because we have some folks here in the room and some folks online who are maybe interested in thinking about these policy ideas. We have these panels today talking about it, which is very exciting, and I think we also have some funders in the room and virtually who might be interested in funding some of this work as well. So with that, I want to thank everyone for being here, both in the room and online, and I want to turn it on over to Eli and his wonderful panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And just letting everybody know, lunch is fully served back there, so please feel free to get up, grab something to eat, something to drink, come grab a seat. We want you to be comfortable. And letting everybody know online as well, I'm sorry we can't provide you with lunch. However, we are absolutely going to take questions, not only from the room, but from our online audience. Feel free to add your questions into the chat. My colleagues will share it with me, and we'll get to as many as we can. But first, let me just briefly introduce who I'm up here with today. I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you. Thank you for being here with us. Their full bios are in your packets at your table, so I won't do that. But I'll just mention, to my right, we're joined by Alma Carrillo, the Executive Director of Buffalo Art Studio, Justin T. Relf, a performing arts educator, coming all the way from Troy, Stephanie A. Johnson Cunningham, Executive Director of Museum Hugh, Philip Morris, the CEO of Proctor's Collaborative, and Nicole Fenichel Hewitt, Executive Director of The Artifact. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here today. So let's get right into it. We talked a little bit up front in our opening remarks, both myself and Sarah, about just some of the ways that we see the power of the impact of artists and arts organizations across New York State today. But beyond the data, beyond the numbers, I think those stories, those impacts are most powerful when we show them rather than just kind of tell them. So I'd love to hear from as many of you as would like to jump in on this question. What is a story that stands out in your mind of the impact that the arts is having in your community? Anybody can feel free to start. Go ahead, Nicole. Yeah, I saw your hand go first.
Hi, everybody. So in Poughkeepsie at the Artifact, one of the favorite illustrations of the power of the arts that I think we have is a festival that we put on called the PKX Festival. And this was a youth-developed arts festival that employs a good number of youth to work year-round on building partnerships with artists. They do everything from a call for entries to collaborating with artists on public art projects. They select the music lineup. They do all of the public speaking, their civic engagement, because they're going down to get festival permissions from the town council and going to the school board for getting involvement. And at the heart of it, the day of the festival includes hands-on arts activities for kids and families, and then it has an art exhibit that's all youth art from the community, and then a film festival that's an international showcase of short films made by young people throughout the world. And the young people who are invested in building really get a chance to develop their voice, to gain skills that will transfer to anything they do. I mean, it's a community organizing position, but then it leaves the community with a really beautiful permanent installation of a public art project as a demonstration of the power of arts. And over time, this festival, it's in its 4th year, coming up May 3rd. If you're in Poughkeepsie, come check it out. Over time, the festival will impact different parts of the community because it moves around. And the idea is that it's going to just uplift and bring vibrancy and hope to a lot of people in our city. Thanks.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you. So for me, I was born and raised in Flatbush, Brooklyn. And I think a lot about the West Indian American Day Carnival. It brings millions of people all across the country, all across the world to Eastern Parkway, Brooklyn. And it is not only an economic engine, but also a cultural anchor. When people come to the carnival, they are supporting local restaurants, small businesses. It even impacts fashion. A lot of designers are creating costumes for the parade. In addition to that, it being a cultural anchor, it is such a great representation of cultural identity and representation of the Caribbean community, in addition to a really great example of resilience. It also brings a sense of belonging and pride and presence for the Caribbean community. And it's I think it's reached over 50 years now. And again, it has brought in so many dollars to the neighborhood that exceeds the weekend that the parade happens every year. And so I think it's just such a great example of how arts and culture is an economic engine that continues to build tourism and also continue to build small community business because of the fact that it continues to bring in so many people into the neighborhood.
Yeah, so I was one of the artists on the CRNY grant. So my partner over there, Rachel Lormer, we did a community listening project, so really based around storytelling. And what we did, we had 3 phases of that project. So one was for us to just interview people from the community, whether you lived there many years ago, whether you currently live there, whether you work in the community. And then we took those stories and Rachel, what she did was created art pieces around the stories that were being told. And then we took all of that information and we culminated with a community theater production, but all around storytelling. And one of the things that I believe our project did was reignite hope for this particular community that's known for gun violence and really bad things that are happening with the youth and things of that nature. It's a community that people kind of want to stay away from. But we were able to go into the Hillside North neighborhood of Troy, partner with one of the community centers there, and we were able to put on that project. And one of the things, and I'll talk more about that as we get into it, but one of the things that I appreciated was what we did kind of sparked something within the city. There was a 90-something-year-old woman who lived in the community, 93-year-old woman, thank you, Rachel, thank you. 93-year-old woman, she's been living in that community for, I believe, 40-something years. And she's a community staple. Many people have gone and come, and she's there. And the very month after we ended our project, we saw the city recognize her by naming the street that she lived on after her. And so that was just one of the many effects that our project had, reigniting hope in the community. And while all these other people are being recognized for other things that are happening, we said, hey, we honored Ms. Gamble at our art exhibit that we had, and then the city turned around and honored her the very next month our project was concluded. So.
I'll better jump in, yeah.
Was just tying in some of the great stories already shared. What I see the arts having the greatest impact in Buffalo, it's really given a sense of community. And I know that they shared words of hope that were addressed here before. And I think that I've seen that, especially at the height of COVID and after the May 14 massacre that happened in Buffalo, where spaces like Buffalo Art Studio became spaces where people came to congregate, to find comfort, to find community. There was an event that we had scheduled for the week after the shooting that was scheduled before, and we were thinking about taking down that event, and we were in conversation with artists and community members. And it was them who asked us to keep the event because they needed a place to congregate. It changed the tone of the event, but they wanted to make sure that we didn't lose our humanity, that there was, the artists did an incredible job doing our representations to honor the lives that were lost, and also to help heal the community who was in a lot of pain. So I think those moments are really important, and how the community comes together to these spaces. These spaces are safe spaces for people to find each other and to learn from each other.
So, but if you want to jump in on the same question, welcome to.
Thank you all. Proctor's Collaborative is named such because we work to collaborate in the community intensely. And our 3 current locations in Schenectady and Albany and Saratoga have benefited from working with organizations helping people in need, either in crisis need, in alcohol or drug abuse situations, or families or women with children who have gone to the city mission in Schenectady. And we have worked with them to create a program over the last 15 years that trains people to come back into the workforce as ambassadors, as welcomers, as people saying to customers coming to the 3 facilities, we're part of your neighborhood, you're part of ours, and we love having you here. It has brought about 125 people employment of a significance, and about half of them have moved on to full-time employment over the last dozen years. So I'm pretty proud of that effort and that integration.
Well, I think, we've got to note just the breadth of the answers we've already gotten, from the 5 of you, from, economic impact, youth development, spaces for community building, workforce development. I mean, that's a lot of impact. Just your brief anecdotes, almost like the first things that kind of come to mind, and I'm sure you could all give me 100 more. But I think that gets at the heart of why we're here today. And we're talking about not only the impact of the arts, but how and why the state should integrate the arts across the policy agenda. And I think you've just illustrated that point. The arts is economic development, workforce development, youth development, community development. How do we make sure that we're fulfilling all of that opportunity, that we're investing in that opportunity? I'd like to spend a lot of this conversation on your ideas for doing just that. But the next thing I'd love to hear from you about is a little bit of where we are right now with the challenges facing artists in the arts. I started my remarks in a very positive note. There really is an incredible story to be told that needs to be told about the impact of the arts across New York State and the work that artists do. But there are some huge challenges. I mentioned, growing headwinds. Just to name a couple, New York City specifically, we've seen that the population of folks who make the majority of their income from an artistic practice has been declining. And that's a really alarming sign. We've certainly seen, as Sarah has illustrated so powerfully, that across the entire state, artists are earning on average about half of the median income. Artists and cultural sector workers, about half the median income of other folks living in the very same cities and regions. We see some new headwinds from the antagonistic administration in Washington, and we see some kind of perpetual challenges, the chronic underfunding of the arts at the state level, and the very minimal funding that exists at the county and the local level. So these are just a few, but there's more. I'd love to hear your thoughts about when you think about the biggest challenges facing artists or the arts and culture sector right now, you know, what's keeping you up at night? What are you worrying about? What should the state in particular be focusing on?
Well, what keeps me up clearly is the national agenda that's emerged with this administration. And to our state legislators and to each of us, we have to encourage standing up to that. We simply must encourage standing up to stupidity, which is largely what's happening at the national level. And that's not easy, and that keeps me up at night. And while we are in New York State, the impacts of this will trickle to us, have already trickled to us. Our school district is at threat of $28 million of support because of DEI. Well, you know, an urban school district is DEI. That's what it is, never mind whether it states it or not. It is that. So what kind of message is that to the cities of our state? And we need to stand up and make sure our legislators stand up and our governor stands up to it. That's my biggest nightmare.
Yeah, I think we all know that New York is a major cultural capital, but I think really what I'd like our legislators and policymakers to really understand is that it's really important for us to understand that arts is the soul of our state, right? The fact that people come here, the fact that people live here is largely due to arts and culture. People feel excited about New York because of what arts and culture provides. So I think what keeps me up is the fact that there continues to be, shortage of arts funding when arts continues to grow and blossom. I think that it's incredibly important for us to understand that the arts community isn't asking for a handout. We have done our job. We've brought people to this state. We have increased tourism again. We continue to allow people to live and thrive here, and the arts are a large part of that. And I think that we have to understand that providing equitable living opportunities and equitable housing for arts and cultural workers is incredibly important for the future of our state. And so I think we also have to remember that the arts are also a cultural anchor, as I mentioned before, and it is also an economic engine for much of what we do. And so it's incredibly important that our policies also reflect and support arts in the way that the arts have supported the state. And so one of the things that, we've talked about at Museum Hugh is increasing, and also, New York for Culture and Arts is increasing NISCA, right? Increasing the funds that NISCA can distribute all across the state to at least $200 million or more. And we have to remember that our budget is $1 billion with a B. And so having the opportunity for the arts to thrive in the way that we allow New Yorkers to thrive, I think is so important to see. And so another thing that is happening is Senator Cordell Clear and Assemblymember Cunningham are working on supporting cultural districts, right? How can we provide funding for cultural districts to allow arts and culture to continue to thrive? Those funds to be placed within the cultural districts so that artists and cultural workers can have a space to thrive within cultural institutions, but also having affordable housing within those cultural districts to thrive as well.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah.
Beautifully said. And on top of housing, I think one of the other just basic human rights that artists and everyone need is healthcare. And healthcare is a challenge for individual artists, obviously earning in that wage range, but it's also a challenge for businesses and cultural organizations that are providing healthcare. The Artifact is a $2 million organization, and we spend about 7% of our budget on healthcare. It seems to be unregulated in that every year the percentage increases are going up between 15 and 25%. every year, and we review and change plans, and this is as an organization that has 15 full-time employees, but then we also know our youngest artists are opting out because they don't want to pay into a system when they don't have enough funds to afford their housing and other costs. So I think it needs to become a big part of our agenda again in the arts community and more broadly.
Just to echo that, that is one of the biggest concerns that when you mention like what keeps you up awake at night is actually the future of the field. What is going to happen to the next generation? We are not bringing arts into the schools. We are cutting programs. We're not providing livable wages and benefits for people to see this as a feasible career. So by not providing basic rights, like just basic benefits, it really is hurting the future. Who's going to come after us? It feels that when I see the young people working in my office, I feel terrible discouraging them to go to graduate school. There's no way for them to continue to pay their debt at the salaries that are currently in our field. And the same thing for artists who decide to go to get their MFA or continue their studies. There's no pathway where there used to be tenure track jobs or K-12 teaching jobs or other types of opportunities before. Those opportunities are dwindling. And until we create a way for the new generation to see a future, then we are also looking at an issue for the future.
Yeah, I think that a huge problem is just seeing artists as critical, just as, other, careers as well. When you said, we've done our job, the impact is there, and who helps to drive that impact? The artist. The artist helps to drive that impact. And so if you take away the provision that we receive as artists, as we see, there's a decline in those who show up to be who they were created to be in the communities that they serve. And then what happens to the impact? And so we were very fortunate, to be a part of the CRNY group where we were supported. We were given the opportunity to have health care, and we were paid a great salary, to do the work that we do. And we were able to do that full time and not have to worry, about all the other, we were able to take care of our everyday needs, along with being funded to actually do, the projects that we set out to do. And so I think just seeing artists as critical, just as, every other occupation, So.
Well, go ahead, Philip, yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I want to add I want to add that we often talk about the arts in the exempt sector, in the not-for-profit sector, without acknowledging thoroughly and fully the immense amount of art in the private sector, especially in the state. And that the division sometimes, maybe even often, causes us to lose sight of where opportunities are or where connections are. And as we did a cultural survey a decade ago in the Capital Region, it was pretty clear that the for-profit cultural worker and businesses were pretty powerful and pretty big. And that's an acknowledgement that we forget on the not-for-profit sector often. And there's linkages and connections there that are way valuable. And state policy can consider how to make those things even better. And I have some examples, but I won't drive you too late in the
Well, no, I think let's dig in. I mean, I think that's a perfect segue into what I'd love to spend really the rest of our time talking about, which is those specific recommendations or ideas that you all may have for state government, for a state legislature, for the governor. So Philip, I'll put you back on the hot seat for a second, but if it's one idea there around what the state can do to help forge those linkages, or frankly, another idea of yours that you think this is something the state should do now that would support the arts sector, that would support artists. What would you like to see happen?
Well, I give the state a lot of credit, and I want to use this only as an example, for the kind of credits that they have offered for private commercial theater to produce upstate. And that allows Commercial Theater of New York to create and build shows that go on tour in the theaters of upstate that can handle them. Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Schenectady, Ithaca, Utica. And that is a brilliant move that links us together rather than keeps us separate. I think the cultural district, though I think we're still nascent in understanding what we're asking for, but the notion of cultural districts is enormous, and the opportunity for it is enormous, because establishing credit opportunities for small businesses, design businesses, fashion businesses, small theaters within a district is a brilliant way to take the work that we have all done so far. And you are right, we have revitalized some of our cities to take it to another place. And it's going to be a mixture of funding and credits and investment and thinking entrepreneurially.
Oh, thanks, Philip. And you certainly have models to point to in other places. Sarah mentioned other states that have launched statewide creative economy plans. London has, I think, very effectively created creative enterprise zones, which include a mix of those kinds of investments and incentives that you're talking about. But there's a huge opportunity to do something like that at the state level. I'd love to turn this open to all of you for your other thoughts. One or maybe two things that you would all like to see the state take on. Maybe it's around the challenges you identified, whether that's artist housing or health insurance or something else that you think is an opportunity. But would love to hear from everybody.
Well, you also mentioned London. They also have a cultural loss program where they support community organizations that are at threat to be lost as well. And I think that's important to point out as well as a need for New York because of the huge transformation that's happening all across the state, but especially New York City, where my organization exists and a lot of the work that I do exists. There is a huge impact happening where people are losing their space and also being priced out. And so there needs to be support for cultural loss happening all across the state is one thought that came to mind since you brought up London. I think also thinking critically about how greater support can come to the arts with taxes from tourism and hotels, since, again, largely people are coming here for arts and culture. I think also thinking critically about ways that we can have greater housing opportunities for cultural workers is another thing that I think legislators and policymakers need to think critically about, because again, there is huge displacement happening across arts and culture. I think a lot of us know that anecdotally, but seeing that within the data, I think that's really important, and I can't stress that enough. And we know that CRNY, Creatives Rebuild New York, did such a great service to New York because it helped a lot of people that I know, that I spoke to personally, help stay within New York City. And so there is an opportunity for greater support for arts workers through greater funding coming, again, whether through taxes and also cultural districts in a way that can be supported these arts workers specifically, and also it'll support arts organizations as well.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, anybody else jump in? Feel free.
I have a really specific idea. So the Artifact embarked on a capital campaign to renovate a beautiful building into a new art center after we merged 3 organizations to become the Artifact. So now we needed larger space. And we were really grateful that the Regional Economic Development Council has increased capital support for arts, and we were able to get support from NISCA, which was wonderful. We were really grateful to get approximately $2.5 million for that capital campaign from NISCA in the large grant cycle, but also through REDC and the Economic Development Corporation, we were able to get about a $2 million grant. And my recommendation is to really look at how that economic development funding is contracted, because it is incredibly difficult to access those funds because they come as reimbursement, not reimbursement as you're spending, but reimbursement when the entire project is complete. So you could be looking at years of financing, and then even then, there's long-term goals that put your project at risk, 5-year goals for employment, when we don't know exactly, we've learned we don't know what the future looks like anymore. So my recommendation would be to kind of streamline that funding, make it accessible. I've seen multiple organizations turn that money away, turn away a $500,000 grant because they can't finance it.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah. Philip or Justin, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to speak on something that was already said, but I won't be redundant. But another thought that came to mind is I would like to see more support for projects that collect data on the impact of arts. Because I believe that, thank you. I believe that if the data is out there, there's like, you can't argue with what is fact. So I would like to see support for projects, more support for projects that are collecting data.
Any of you that know our work, we are always seeking some source of revenue that is consistent and less reliant on the whims of funding. It strikes me the state could do the same thing for us, for the culturals, by working with the AG's office and taking all these monstrous fines largely from the financial sector's abuse, but other places too, and putting them in a cultural bucket so that funding for the arts becomes less politicized, less every year going and begging, which is how we all feel. I've been doing this for 52 years. But imagine if some billion-dollar fine on U.S. Bank was ours. Imagine if we had one of those a year, which would be easy. At one point, I was adding these numbers up, going, man alive, we would do so well if we just got the money from people who abuse us.
Thank you, Philip. Alma, if you would jump in.
Well, again, I don't want to repeat some of the items that were already addressed, but cultural tourism, it's really important, especially for some of us who are outside of New York City. Western New York has so much to offer. And not just the big institutions. We have small and medium-sized organizations that can attract people to live there, to work there, to make them want to tell their friends and visit. Again, talking about the economic impact, I think that is something that we can tap further into for some of the communities outside of New York City.
Thank you, Alma. Let me ask one more question, then we'll turn it over to our audience. I'll try to keep this one brief and just say, what are some of the next steps needed to work toward this vision? I mean, whether it's advocacy, whether it's, does New York State need a cultural plan or a creative economy plan? Is there more support needed from the private sector? What should that look like? Is there something the state can do to help? What more is needed at the county level or at the local level in the places where you're working? Would love to get a sense from you all about how do we move more of this agenda forward?
A creative economy plan would be spectacular. It needs to be built from the bottom up. It can't be 8 people at a statewide level making a plan and then saying, does this work for you? It's got to be consistent, almost like plans for cities, city planning, where a cultural plan becomes per county and almost a requirement, probably a requirement, that every county submit a cultural plan for that county. And that gets built up into the state's plan. And I think that would be a powerful tool because it says, this is important, guys. This is important. Most local electeds and hired people, and I taught at Rockefeller College for a while, those guys have no idea how to work with an architect. Nobody is teaching them how to deal with media. No one's telling them how to deal with a cultural. No one's saying when you become the paid executive county manager for Tompkins County, you're going to have to deal with these kinds of issues and people and points of view. That's not part of how our government at the ground level is trained, taught, or expected to behave. And I think that's part of the advantage of a statewide cultural plan at the local level, built up and required.
All right, well, on that note, let me turn it over to our audience. We'd love to hear your questions as well. I think the way this will work is that my colleagues have a microphone, so we'll bring it to you. Let us know your name, if you're here with an organization, and please do try to keep your questions short so we can get to as many as possible. And then we're going to segue directly into our second panel with our elected officials. But throw your hands up if you have a question, comment anywhere in the room. My colleagues will come by with the microphone. Don't be shy. This is a room full of artists and arts organizers. I can't believe we're having a shy crowd. There we go. Okay, so we'll go to Lucy in the front, and then I see in the table right behind her, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much.
Philip talked about the impact of what is happening at the federal level that's going to have on us, and it will come in many, many different ways. But one of the most vulnerable, the thing that's going to hit very, very hard is education. Right? We get a lot of money from the federal government to pay for schools in our state, and I'm worried about arts and education being the first to go, as it often is. And New York State is one of the only 18 states that does not have arts as part of its core curriculum. So, I just wanted to throw that back to any of you that work in arts education, and thoughts on, what we can do to make sure our legislators know that this is going to be a crisis, not only for our schools, but also for arts in our schools.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. The Artifacts works with young people ages 4 to 24. We work in schools, we work after school with students, we have workforce development funding, we employ about 165 youth every year to work in arts and media, to gain apprenticeships, and I know that shifting the whole state agenda to, not be one of those 18 states is a huge shift. But the things I think we could do more immediately there are a lot of opportunities for extended learning time through programs like the Office of Family and Children's Services, through LEAPS and Empire and 21st Century historic programs, and they're not equitably, there's not enough money. You're competing with your neighbors' schools that are equally challenged, and the whole system of how schools are funded really is, it's not equitable. But then, you have several low-income districts fighting for the opportunity to give hundreds of kids free after-school engagement programs, which is so needed, not only for that youth development piece. So I think more funding for those extended learning opportunities, and I also think more professional development. This is just a small step we can take. The Artifact works with core subject teachers to integrate arts into every subject. So we go in schools and we do residencies, and I think there could be a lot more of that. Every student, every grade needs exposure to arts in order to become self-actualized adults who also understand their creative skill set and can implement that in arts careers or any other career, and become audience members for all of the artists.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, there was a question, I think, middle table. Yeah, and then we'll head over to Kevin right there.
Thank you guys for your time. There's some really great points made, especially about putting all the funding into a pot, and that the idea that the artists have already done our job, and now we need the support. And I think that a lot of the smaller organizations need help with that pitch. So if you're reaching out to a developer because they're in your neighborhood and they should be giving back, what can we say about the economic impact of what we are doing in the area we're already in? And if we could empower some of the smaller organizations that can't dedicate the staff time to do all this research, to know where the grants are, to know how to even approach our elected officials. If there was some kind of a handbook and a resource online that says if you're approaching a developer, this is some of the research that you could touch upon, right? This is how you can prove to your constituents or to the larger businesses that you're asking for support for, this is the research that you want to hit upon. These are the talking points. Does that make sense? Like, you know, how can we empower some of the smaller organizations that don't have a staff of 12 with 4 of them dedicated to this? Thank you.
I think it's important that smaller organizations tap into the work that's already being done, like New York for Culture and Arts and Museum Hue. We do that research, and having that community and that network to have that conversation is always present. I know New York for Culture and Arts have weekly and monthly meetings just about that, and so I think that's the important part, is that people begin to tap into a community and build that community and support organizations that are already doing that work and doing that research and seeing what specifically is happening and what you should know, what elected officials you should be speaking to, who's in the arts committee and different things like that. I think that education is there, but again, tapping into organizations already doing that work and supporting those organizations is incredibly important. Again, New York for Culture and Arts has those weekly and monthly check-in meetings where you can ask those kind of questions, and Museum Hue also has a community where you can also check in and ask those questions.
I see that Jen wants to say something. Well, just to, before she speaks, but one of the ways that Buffalo Art Studio has been able to create partnerships with a lot of our neighbors has been actually building relationships. And that takes time and that takes trust. It's the same thing as when you do grassroots work. It's a lot of knocking on doors and asking them to, welcoming them to your space and going to meet them where they're at. It's been successful for us to build those relationships, and that is the way. And we also bring data, and I think that's what Jen Swan from ASI wanted to speak about that as a resource.
Good morning. I'm Jen Swan, the president of Arts New York State and also director at Art Services, Inc., the service agency in Buffalo. Actually commenting on the last question, thinking about how to develop arts and cultural organizations of all sizes, also artists in the creative field, really thinking about what are the resources that are available to us. And I think on a statewide level, thinking about everything that the panel has talked about, whether it's creating a new pool of funds that we can access or already tap into the existing pool of funds, and thinking about all the corners of the state, talking about small, we even talk about micro organizations in Buffalo, micro, small, mid-sized, large organizations. How can they all access the resources that are available to them, and then using their regional communities to really uphold that and tap into that. And also kind of threading in a couple of these other ideas as well. We're talking about RADC and ESD funding, making that more accessible because it's not realistic and it's a barrier to entry for many artists working for organizations and organizations themselves to access that even right from the beginning. And so opening the doors from the get-go to say, these resources are available, well, that's not enough if you can't follow through with it, if you cannot provide the capacity at your own organization to access it. So really threading all those concepts together, in addition to, one more comment, the cultural plan. Erie County, where Buffalo is located, actually is undergoing a cultural plan that is being spearheaded by our county. Really getting a lot of feedback. It's still in the working process, but I liked what Philip said about thinking about the regional communities coming up with their own cultural plans and then sending that to the state to say, we're all different, but we all have a common universal theme here in the arts. So if anyone on the panel has any comments about that as well.
That's great. Thank you, Jen. Folks can definitely jump in on that. Yeah, Kevin had his hand up there, so we'll go to Kevin and then head to Chris in the middle of the room.
Well, I want to thank you, Eli, and I want to thank the panel also. I think I can relate to every single point that you've made. We're going through the New York Forward right now, so be careful for what you wish for. You might get it. It took us 5 tries through DRI and then New York Forward to win it, but it is a hellacious process to go through that. And also, under the circumstances and times, very challenging to get what I call market rate financing. So I'll be back next year, hopefully to say some good things about that, but I just really want to lock into a couple of points, and it's going to center around housing. So I'm in the Rockaway section of Queens, and we have this sort of isolated neighborhood where there are a lot of local artists. And we're also going through a major downtown revitalization, which includes about 2,000 units of affordable housing. One of the comments I'm going to make, and I'll get to the city and then to the state as well, I don't have enough bandwidth as RDRC, my organization. My suggestion would be this. I've not seen a community board in all my years say no to specialty housing that deals with veterans and probably also artists. And my suggestion, since you do have a coalition, you have more bandwidth, to say, listen, there's a push and pull on how much or how little in black and brown communities. But when you begin to talk about specialty like artists, I have not seen a community board say no to that, especially when media is there. They do not want to be associated with that. So that's something just to think about as sort of when somebody comes to, especially developers, saying, I need your support. Well, they're usually asking for that because there's a lot of capital investment from the city of New York to make it work. So the trade-off could be a set aside for artists out of this next development. So that'd be one. I also think at the state level, the governor got it right second time around. She was penalizing communities in my area, also Long Island. It was sort of a punishment if you don't do this. She turned around and restated the whole issue of affordable by saying incentives. So it could work in New York City.
The live stream as well, which is, I'll throw them out there. Feel free to answer whichever you like, and we'll get to Chris as well, and then well, that'll probably be all the time we have. But so one question came up about how can we better harness the for-profit art sector to help support the whole art sector? Someone else mentioned financial literacy. Have any of the panelists thought about, or are they running financial literacy programs? I think talking about for artists in particular. And a third question about, is private philanthropy filling the gaps as state funding is insufficient? Does this reliance risk private interests influencing public cultural experiences? So feel free to jump in on any of those. And also, you know what, just in the interest of time, why don't we take Chris's question too, and then we'll have a couple minutes to discuss.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris from Creators Rebuild New York. Such an incredible panel, incredible support system that exists here. With that said, I'm a little worried that there's, from what I've seen, there's just not enough support systems for artists. So I'm wondering if anyone on the panel could give me some suggestions, or Justin, if you want to give some ideas of where do you go for support? What support systems do you think artists need to do in order to do their work better, to thrive, to get the things, the basics they need? Any ideas? Just curious.
Yeah, so one of the things that I work for a very small organization in Troy, and I am the only artist there. Actually, no, I lied. There are two of us now. And so one of the things that we are talking about now is that very point. Like, who do we connect with? What organizations do we need to link up with? Basically, how do we plug into a community that's already supporting artists that have supports like financial literacy and like how to get health care and like how to get affordable housing and things of that nature. So I don't have those answers as of yet, but I definitely think that for artists that do not feel supported, we have to plug into a community that is uplifting and supporting, just like we do for every other piece of our life. In order for us to thrive, we have to plug into organizations or groups that are supporting us. So.
Or those organizations should plug into you, too.
Absolutely.
I want to answer something that answers one of the online questions and goes back to the gentleman with the beard when he was talking about research for fundraising. Thinking like the for-profit is the way to understand how you can link with the for-profit to make something happen. You have to think like them. So we're just starting a 6-story artist housing project, 1 floor of which will be housing for actors in our Lork Theater in Albany. It was a long game, a lot of conversation, a lot of understanding what he was trying to get out of the housing credits he was applying for, and what we were able to do to soften.
Just wanted to add about just thinking about the idea of funding and foundations. You know, something that we have seen in our region is that the funding, especially since COVID, has moved away from the arts, especially even after May 14, and that is another issue that we are facing. So as this is why NISCA funding is so important, but it's an opportunity to advocate to foundations to increase the pot of money they are giving away and to not forget the arts. We are so important. We don't have to explain ourselves, but it seems like we're always asked to do so. The other thing about it's you know, in reference about finding who your community is. Buffalo Art Studio has created this OATS program, and it's time that we actually spend helping artists to apply for grants, to write proposals, to work on their artist statement, to work on applications for any number of things. And most of them are not to be happening at Buffalo Art Studio. Some of them are and some of them are not. But it's really about helping the artists move their careers forward. If they're successful, we are all successful. So it's about finding your place.
Thank you, Alma. Well, on that optimistic note, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for our first panel. So I want to thank you all so much. If our audience could join me. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. And we'll move directly into our second panel. So if our elected officials could come and join me, please do. Hey, gentlemen, great to see you. Come on up, grab a seat. Hey, good to see you. Great to see you. Hey, great to meet you. All right. All right. Well, for anybody who's just tuning in, joining us right now, we have about 270 people watching us online, actually. So, we're excited to have folks from all over the state tuning in. Thank you all to everybody who's here in the room today. I'll just briefly mention, although I know I met all three of you before, but I'm Eli Dvorkin, Editorial and Policy Director at Center for an Urban Future. We are so thrilled to be joined today by three really amazing champions for the arts and the cultural sector in the state legislature, including the new chair of the Assembly's Arts Committee, Assemblymember Ron Kim, welcome, Assemblymember Jonathan Rivera, and Assemblymember Brian Cunningham. The State Assembly is very well represented up on the stage here today. Unfortunately, Senator Serrano told us he had to present in conference today. He wasn't able to make it, sends his regrets. But no matter, we are going to move right into the conversation. Certainly for folks who want to know more about our elected officials, their full bios are in your packets, but we're just going to get right into it. So, I wanted to start by saying, certainly we heard a lot in that first panel, not just about challenges and not even just about the power of the arts, but really some good ideas, some specific kind of concrete ideas about how the state can more fully tap or harness the cultural vitality that exists all over New York State to not only invest in the arts and invest in artists, but really investing in the impact that the arts and the cultural sector brings to New York. And you all have been thinking about that, have been doing that. But I actually wanted to start with something that I asked our other panelists as well, which is, I think a story can go a lot further in illustrating the power of the arts than just any number or data point alone. And I guess I just wanted to ask all of you, you all bring a unique relationship with the arts to your work in Albany. Tell us something brief about what the arts means to you. Help us understand a little bit better, what is your relationship to the arts and how does that affect your day-to-day? Oh, sir. Give you a microphone. Yeah.
Thank you, Eli, and it's
should be on if you get.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for hosting today's panel. And I want to thank my colleagues, Jonathan and Brian, for joining this as well. Very important panel on the arts. For me, I summarize my vision and why I feel passionate about the arts community with two words. And that's intrinsic link. Intrinsic link. In a world that's so driven by externalities and what I call extrinsic motivators, from our smartphones, from the self-validations, to just constantly being online and being surrounded by things that constantly try to validate or invalidate us as a society. We lack purpose and belonging. And for the arts, whether it's music, whether it's visual, it provides a safe space where we can find that intrinsic link, where we can have purpose and we can feel like we belong to a community. And no dollar sign, no dollar bill can put amount to that impact. But that's our job. We're trying to translate that into the economic impact. Because when you create intrinsic link, a person will spend locally, will be part of that community, will grow that economy, will want to, make sure there's intergenerational growth. That is the impact that we're trying to translate every day in our budget to make people understand that this isn't just charity, that there's a real economic impact to this, and there's nothing like it that creates that intrinsic link to one's community than the arts community.
So for me, I think it translates to a quote that I heard a while ago by Weiwei that says, "Everything is arts, everything is politics." In my household, that couldn't be more true. I'm married to an artist, Stephanie Cunningham, who's also here and runs Museum Hue. But when you think about politics and art, it governs everything we do, right? The way we walk is art form. The way we characterize laws is laws and politics. So I feel like for me, it's always trying to figure out both the economic impact that the arts community has on our communities, but also that it governs just the way we operate as human beings. And I think that's centered and really important.
Well put by both these guys. I guess the only thing I'd add, aside from agreeing with Brian and Ron, is that, I don't know, maybe on a more personal level, the reason that I've always been compelled to sort of think and work in arts in my role in government is just my own personal story, which is, I, like many folks probably in New York State, but especially in upstate New York, my family's originally from the Caribbean, from Puerto Rico, and to go from Buffalo to Puerto Rico is quite a distance and quite a difference, as you can imagine, in weather alone. But the thing that's always connected people that are not first generation or second generation or third generation, but even further in some instances, or first generation that just missed the island, is we provide spaces in which music is heard and bomba is heard and art is seen. And if it wasn't for the art, we wouldn't have any connection to our history, I think. And because we're not learning it in elementary school. I didn't learn about Puerto Rico in elementary school in a real way. I learned about it by listening to the music, by frankly eating the good food, by enjoying the company, hearing the stories. And that's what art does. So if you think about that progression, it's, there is a sort of a compelling feeling that every human has to know more about their history and their past. Art does that. And then what else does art do? Art then educates me in ways that and things that I didn't know existed. And then what it also does, it exposes me to other mediums, because I enjoy playing music now only because I learned about it and loved it at a younger age. And then you learn about one thing after another. So you're just broadened in your understanding of your own history and the potential of your future. And that broadening just makes you a more open-minded person. And then you just see the ripple effects of what art can have to the person. And you multiply that by people, and you see where that's really where change happens. So I think that arts are a solution to a lot of our problems, frankly, as a society. And that's sort of a driving force. I mean, it sort of comes from my own sort of personal experience.
Well, I love that, Senator. Oh, absolutely. Don't want to step on an applause line. No, absolutely. And I really want to ask you all about how we do that, how we solve more of our problems with the arts in New York State, and we can drill down into some specific areas. But I think one of the ways that we get there is with adequate resources. And here we are in the middle of budget season. So let me just kind of paint the picture for folks in the room, make sure everybody's on the same page. The governor's executive budget proposed $60 million for NISCA for those operating grants that are so vital for so many of the nonprofit organizations across the state. Now that's $20 million more than the governor's starting position last year. Certainly less than what ultimately passed in the state budget last year. At the same time, the executive budget proposes $40 million for capital grants. That's down $10 million from the starting point last year. So I'd love to ask you all, what do you see in these shifts from last year? What funding levels would you like to see the state get to this year? What's the path?
I think, we want to continue to grow the budget. Part of it is the song and dance. They take it back, we put it back, and then we may get a little bit more at the end of the outcome. But with the capital, some of the money hasn't been allocated, so we need to do a better job as a government to put that money out as quickly as possible so it doesn't carry over to impact the next year's budget, which is happening now. So we need to hold the people who are giving out the capital money accountable to make sure that we continue to fund that capital money at the right pace. But we need a full accounting of what the needs are with the smaller artists and organizations that, as the previous panel have indicated, that do not have, the question came from the previous panel, that do not have the resource to sit down and write the grants, to make sure that they're not sidelined by the bigger groups, to make sure that they're also included in the process as well. And if we account for all of that, I think we should be doubling the money that we're laying out right now to make sure that all the artists and organizations that are doing positive work are getting a piece of that pie, because that piece of pie has a specific return on investment that has a huge, I would say, 9, 10, 11 times return multiplier impact in our local economies.
Gentlemen, if you want to add anything, yeah.
I guess what I would add is, Ron's right in that there's annually there's this sort of push and pull when it comes to this, where the governor proposes this and we propose that. And it's sort of sad that it's on the backs of organizations that don't have much and don't like the limbo of not knowing what they're going to get. I mean, oddly enough, we do this to entities that need the clarity of what money they're getting the most. We do it to you folks, so it's unfortunate. But what I'd say also is, to add to that, is that, it's 100% true, I bet, that the position of the administration is that the reason that the capital budget, the allocation of capital funds is decreased is because, well, not all of it was spent last year. But the fact that it's not all spent from last year isn't a reflection of the lack of need. It's a reflection of the lack of capacity in most situations, where we, as New York State, don't make it easy for you guys to take money from us. Like, we put you through a bit of a rigorous thing, and it's not, you would think with these guys can tell you, like, we're so behind on technology in the New York State Assembly, we still fill out forms by hand. I mean, some areas, no joke. So you would think with the advent of all the technological things that we could be doing, that there should be more expediency in how long it takes you to fill out paper A to paper B to paper C to get to us to get the money back to you. You would think, but no. It seems like that's a forever slow process. That's not unique to this sector, but that's consistent in state government. But at the end of it, it's on us to push to make those things go faster. But again, it's not a lack of need, because there's clear need. No matter how much money we could allocate to it, it'll never be enough, but we just have to keep on pushing for more. But it's really because so many organizations, especially smaller ones, they don't have the capacity to be on top of all the, you need this insurance, you need that paperwork, you need this, you need that. And it's a hassle that we unfortunately put you through. But ideally, we'll work on it. The other thing I would say to that is, it's on us as members to sort of think about funding, not solely through NISCA, not solely through capital, but infusing new ways of getting money out to organizations that are doing work on top of that. Not taking away from NISCA, not taking away from the capital money, but what are we doing to do more? I could bore you with the stuff that I do in my district, but it's on us to sort of constantly be thinking about what other avenues we have.
Yeah, I think John and Ron hit the nail on the head. I think it's really a procurement reform for the state. I mean, we're talking about a $238 billion budget annually we put out, and how slow it is for money to get out the door to groups, even from the expense side and particularly the capital side. One thing I will say is that one thing we could do a better job of is, a lot of the bigger organizations typically apply for capital funding, and a lot of small organizations do not apply for capital because of the process. We certainly need procurement reform, and I think, to John's last point, is really connecting the public-private partnership piece of it to help fill those gaps. I mean, that is a huge part in terms of helping organizations scale at size, and making sure that every person that comes to our office for a meeting, we're figuring out how to connect them to cultural institutions in our district back home.
Thank you, gentlemen. I mean, I want to ask, building off of that, a couple of those points, talking about how you more fully integrate the arts and artists into the state's policy agenda. And Assemblymember Rivera, you talked about that just now, saying, look, it can't just be, only the $80 or so million that NISCA can re-grant. I'd love to ask you some ideas for how you do that. I mean, I'll throw out a couple of possibilities, and I'd love your thoughts. Certainly, one would be around supporting artists directly. We've heard a lot in this conversation earlier. Artists in general are earning, about half of what a typical worker's earning in really every single corner of the state. Many artists are facing growing levels of financial insecurity, even as incomes have been stagnating. And those disparities are even wider for most artists of color, across the whole state. And cost of living, obviously, is skyrocketing. So one question there is, what more can the state do to shore up the financial security of its artist population? Let me start there and see if you have some thoughts about, because that can't just be a NISCA problem to solve.
I mean, I think from the last panel, what we heard was specifically around the cost of living in New York City specifically, but across the state. So when we talk about artist housing and healthcare and other things that we know artists need, I think the other thing we should be doing is thinking more creatively in terms of not just thinking about a singular agency being the owner of arts and culture, but how do we spread that all throughout all the agencies? When we talk about educational funding and we're talking about teaching artists and stuff like that, how do we put more money in different buckets so that they're able to pull down those things? I always said that when you look at policy work, it's kind of like an octopus. There's the middle, right, of the octopus and all the tentacles that go around it. We have to think about arts in the same perspective, that the art is here, but there's all these other ecosystems that it supports it, and we have to give those things life.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, part of it is the mistake we make is that we sort of think about arts and tourism in a way as like an afterthought, as if it's like maybe we'll get to it at the end. It's rarely ever on the forefront of when we think about how are we making big public investments, how are we building communities, how are we, accepting this versus that and to be in the neighborhood. We just don't think about the arts on the forefront the way we should, because we just perceive it as sort of a luxury, when in reality, it's far from a luxury. It's certainly a wonderful thing to be able to expose children and families and people and taxpayers to the arts, but we still haven't figured out a way to just understand the pure benefit of the arts on everyday people, on what that does to a morale of a neighborhood, on what that does truthfully to the economy of that neighborhood, what it does for employment, what it does for education, what it does, and all these other things. So until we comprehend the massive benefit that this sector has on the state, we're never gonna truly treat it as the important thing that it is. So I'm sorry, I'm preaching to the choir to the highest point here, right? But, I just think that, going down from, the state down to local government, which, I also worked in local government too, so I saw it there too. It's just not there in the way that it should be. And, in reality, we're not infusing artists in decision-making processes because of it. If we really looked, it doesn't occur to us that when we're really putting together a city plan or a state plan, how often are artists part of that process? Probably never. If they are, it's at the back end where we're gonna say, oh, a mural would go nice there. Or something like that. It's just sort of like a throwaway thing, which it shouldn't. But we don't infuse artists in decision making because we don't perceive them to be a voice necessary at a table. But it's the opposite. We have to.
I'd love to build on that point a little bit. I mean, one of the things that we actually recommended in our Upstate's Creative Spark report was a new initiative to embed artists in state government agencies, and that's something that you all did. That the administration and the legislature together really accomplished last year. I think most New Yorkers still don't know about this yet because it hasn't been fully announced. But we understood that the RFPs went out, agencies were excited about it, from what I heard. And this isn't just a small stipend or like a mural project. It's a full-time job in a state agency. To your point, Assemblymember Rivera, about how do you actually get artists a seat at the table? So I guess I'd love to ask all of you, how do we do more of that? I mean, that's an incredibly exciting new initiative. It's also really modest. It's a few artists in state government. I don't want to minimize it. It's incredibly exciting. It's the first time New York State has ever done anything like this. But what else can we do to give artists more of a seat at the table? Are there other initiatives that you would like to see? Is it a dedicated funding stream that we don't have today? Are there other opportunities to integrate artists into the policymaking process, whether that's youth development and education or aging or, the opioid epidemic or you name it? How do we bring artists in?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to undermine our efforts to bring artists into the state workforce, because it is incredibly difficult to build any kind of public administrative capacity these days at the state. To actually allocate and build something at the public level, I think it's a monumental step, no matter what we do. So the fact that we got it done, it's a great first step, and we can grow from there. Our job now is to report back on it and just lay it up for the governor and keep telling her she's doing a good job, and hopefully we can continue to go in the right direction in placing value in artists. And that's what this boils down to, whether we value or devalue or unvalue the artist and the creative class in our society. And there are communities, and I know my good friend Chris Hewitt is here, in a place like Kingston, where we even helped create a local community currency that would place more value on the local arts and local resources, and create an entirely different way of paying for stuff based on what that community values at the very local level. So there are many different ways to approach this, where we could put value on the things that we care about. And the state can do a lot more to open up these opportunities. And the Hudson Valley Current is a great example of that, if you guys want to look that up.
If you want to jump in there, I got plenty of other questions for you all. I mean, one that kind of takes it in a slightly different direction. Assemblymember Rivera, I mean, when we first spoke, you mentioned the challenges that some organizations have had in your district around securing, capital investments. We heard a lot from that first panel about the kind of be careful what you wish for, and we've written very positively about the shift of REDC dollars toward more arts and culture projects. We think that's part of the recipe. There's a lot more funding there than there'll ever be through NISCA. But organizations, understandably, there's some big challenges there. I think one is clearly capacity for small organizations to participate in that kind of funding in the first place. Being able to, as Nicole mentioned earlier, float the full cost of a project or fundraise for it or otherwise get financing for it when that reimbursement won't come potentially until years down the line, and there's so many other issues. I'll mention one that hasn't really come up yet, though, which is around creative entrepreneurship. And I've talked to a lot of artists over the past few years, as well as arts groups, arts organizations, that have said, we don't want to just have grant funding anymore. We want to figure out how to become more economically self-sufficient. That looks more like entrepreneurship than just like writing grants. I talked to somebody that created one of the floats, one of the crews in the West Indian Day Parade in New York City, which what Stephanie mentioned earlier, and they were talking about, well, we do fundraising like what we hear big museums do. We have a big party, and somebody's uncle had a auto body shop, with like a big yard, and we have a big party there, and we sell drinks, and, we raise money, and isn't that what the big museums do, Except when we do it, this person told me, we got shut down by the cops. We didn't have the right permits or whatever. But isn't that what museums do? They throw a big fancy party, and everybody pays money, and they get nice drinks. We did the same thing, and this is what happened to us. And that was a powerful story to me that stuck with me. That was from a few years ago when I interviewed that gentleman. But I guess my point here is, are we missing some opportunities when it comes to supporting the arts and culture sector outside of grant funding, but with investments that can create more community wealth, that can help more creative entrepreneurs start and grow arts-based businesses, that can help generate more of a return for local artists and arts communities that way? I'd just love it. Have you been thinking about this? Are there ideas there? Certainly, that capital piece is part of it, but it's also this bigger question, I think, about small business development and entrepreneurship in the arts and cultural sector.
I mean, I guess what I would say is, it's not pushing back on it, because that has to be a part of what the future of arts funding has to look like. We have to be nimble enough to explore these new things. But I would just say, government still isn't doing its job in this sector. And, we have to be unapologetic as leaders in government to say, no, government should be at the forefront of ensuring that arts are appropriately funded. Parks exist, and governments oversee parks because parks will never make money. And that's okay that parks don't make money. We shouldn't apologize that parks or arts or community swimming pools and libraries, that these are not revenue generating things. And that's not a bad word, that they're not revenue generating. We as government should see the value in a park, in an artist, in an artwork, in a whatever, in a library. And it's okay that they don't make enough money. That's fine. Brian, this is a $250 billion budget. we still are not doing our best. We haven't put our full shoulder into funding arts correctly. So yes, I totally agree that there's going to be certain sectors of the arts sort of universe that in which we can pursue things like that, where artists are able to make a good living, because the sort of underlying problem of a lot of this is that, you know, the folks in this room that work in this sector, you're not paid well. Your staffs, you wish you could pay your staffs more. We wish we could pay artists more. Like, that's absolutely true. So we want to be able to provide spaces in which artists can be fairly compensated and can make a living off of this. But just, you know, I'm of a belief that we could be more creative in government. We could be more, you know, firm in government about funding the arts. And like I said, we should just be unapologetic that you know, this is a necessary and essential part of society, that, you know, as much as we spend on, frankly, like things that you just roll your eyes at in the state budget probably, imagine if we were doing this. Like, one crazy idea is, back home in my city and my county, though it's not working as well as we'd like, there's this policy that exists in city government, county government, that whenever a large public works project happens, a percentage of that project, and it's probably less than 10%, has to go to arts. So if we're going to spend, you know, $50 million to build a building, well, 1% of that has to go to some sort of local art installation or artwork in that. Imagine if we did that at the state level. Think how much money DOT spends on roads. Think how much we just spent. I love the Buffalo Bills, as you can imagine. Think how much money we spent on the Bills Stadium. It was $1 billion. If 1% of that went to the arts, like, Jen Swan would be a happy person, I'm sure. And Alma would be very happy back home. But, you know, we're not pushing ourselves to think creatively in this. So that's what I'd say.
I mean, I know what you're saying, Jonathan. I agree that we should be unapologetic when funding the arts and parks. But one point that I do kind of differ is that there is a tremendous return on the money that we put in back economically from the arts. Like 80% of tourism in New York City is based on art institutions, people coming in from outside communities, visiting art communities and centers and spending the weekend there and spending locally. So I think if we're able to capture that data more accurately and be able to make an argument that it's not exponential return, right? But we haven't reached the maximum amount of how much more we can generate in terms of revenues. And upstate New York, the parks, for example, are at equal level as agriculture now in terms of revenue generator for communities, because people go there and spend at restaurants and hotels and on other places, and it's been great. So I think, you know, yes, I agree with you that we should be unapologetic, but we're not going to change the Constitution to make art a right. I mean, that's just not gonna happen. We don't even have housing as a right in our Constitution. You know, there's so many other things we need to get right to lay the foundation for the creative class, and we haven't even gotten there. So before that, we have to make the economic argument in everything we do. Just one point, in South Korea, a long time ago, made a conscious choice to allocate a certain percentage into the arts because they saw the economic impact. 15 years later, look at what they're producing when you look up Netflix and K-pop and Korean pop and Korean drama. They're just getting 50, 100 times on the money that they laid out for these artists. And to your point, there's so much talent in your neighborhood, young people, you see it, just hungry of passion or purpose. They're trying to express themselves. In New York, this is New York. Talent, artists that come out of New York will just be global in a heartbeat. You know, will go viral in a heartbeat. You know, and I just think we need to do a lot more instead of taking them for granted, thinking that, oh, well, you know, if you don't save this person, there'll be more in line. We can't think that way.
I think one thing entrepreneurs say to me all the time is they just wish government would get out their way a little bit. in some respects, because government also, we have a procurement problem, we can't get in at the door fast enough. I think one thing that we propose this year that would help is we know that with businesses, just like personal folks, people that started new businesses have a hard time scaling in the first 7 years. So one thing we proposed is actually to freeze business taxes for the first 3 years for businesses who start up. That's a huge kick for a entrepreneur who's starting an organization who's trying to rent space that now has to think about rent, taxes, and opposed to just getting the taxes out the way so they can really scale in those first 3 years, and then we can do a progressive tax once we get to the third year, once that business survives. So I think that's one thing that we could do to really help kickstart innovation and have entrepreneurs really unleash their full potential.
That's great, Assemblymember. Thank you. I want to take some questions from the audience. We have a few minutes left, so same rules as before. Throw your hands up. My colleagues will bring you a microphone. Please let us know your name. If you're here with an organization, please try to keep your questions brief so we can get to as many as possible. And I'm also seeing your questions online as well. Why don't we start? Corey, I see your hand up in the middle. Can bring a microphone right to the middle of the room. Keep your hands up. I'll get to as many folks as possible. Thank you.
Corey, ACE, Upstate Alliance for the Creative Economy. I'm going to be really quick about this. We're all right-brain thinkers here. We understand the value proposition, but the people we have to sell to are coming from a different perspective. And at ACE, it's always been an idea that the metrics are really important to be able to help those people to understand. What type of metric support could we provide you from the ground level to help you to be able to pitch this to those that you need to pitch it to?
I mean, I think thanks to your efforts, my new capacity as chair, I was stunned by the data points and the narratives and the stories. I mean, you have it all. The one pager that you were sending out, it's right there, right? I mean, it's so. I think you've already done so much work. I think now it's being visible, normalizing the stories and the data over and over, and getting into incepting the data points into our people's minds. Because unfortunately, public capacity and public-private building in New York, from my perspective, has always been about the economy and economic terms. And that I don't really care to talk that way. I don't talk to my kids in economic terms, but up here, that's what people respond to, and that's why you need to normalize those things, and it's up to us to continue to do that.
I guess I would add specifically, like, we have to make the narrative be about, the economic benefit, but really about, like, the kitchen table benefit of, like, how many jobs are really produced in the sector. People don't get that part of it, I don't think. I mean, people think, oh, it's nice to have art, and it attracts tourists, and it does this, and that. But, like, the amount of people that are employed and sort of the offshoot ways, too, of, like, ancillary things that are supporting that. Like, we don't understand the magnitude of how the sort of employment force of the sector is, I don't think.
That's great. Other questions? Yes, okay, we'll go Max over here, then we'll come to the left. Striped shirt, black and white striped shirt? Yeah, great, thank you.
Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Assembly members, for your great work for the people of New York and for the arts work and engagement that you do to protect our creative communities across New York State. And I'm Michael Max, and I'll be the Executive Director of the Public Service Multimedia Network of the People of the Bronx. It's truly public media in that it's participatory media. It's a spotlight on arts and culture, like at Brick Arts Media in Brooklyn, at Apollo Media Center in Buffalo, and QPTV in Queens. And I'm proud to say that I serve in the district of a champion for the arts and Senator Jose M. Serrano with the BronxNet Media and Technology Studios in the South Bronx. And we are so proud to have amazing artists at BronxNet all the time, but particularly proud of our artist employment program, Creatives Rebuild New York artists, who produced amazing, original, innovative arts programming at BronxNet, did youth and community engagement around the arts at BronxNet. The 10 artists we had at BronxNet, well, it resulted in over 90 people working with some compensation because of the robust nature of these programs and arts programming. And this policy playbook that Sarah referred to earlier can be a living document. And essentially, you know, the common values that we have can be built upon. The linkages that Assemblymember Kim described, the arts and media connected, spotlighting the arts and awareness about arts programming in the community, making sure we recognize our artists, like understanding what's important for our society to strive and thrive. And when you compare it to what's happening and how distant we are becoming with mind-numbing toxic algorithms that distract us from community, when you look at community spaces like some of the folks are providing for here, like Open Stage Media in Schenectady and Proctor's Theater, as well as at places like Brick, Apollo, Bronx, and at QPTV, where we're engaging together. Like, what can we do to channel that and leverage that energy for better algorithms, local algorithms, strive and thrive algorithms that sort of nourish us with arts programming, maybe channel some of that revenue from huge AI corporations into natural intelligence, emotional intelligence, human intelligence, like, you know, updating outdated policy on the national level and in the states are key. And there's creative minds in this room, and it's a policy discussion. I think we should think big for our societies. And, you know, we have something happening in New York State. And we have the Tech Equity Access Media New York Act, which is going to be introduced this week. And thank you, Assembly members, for being a part of the previous iteration of that legislation. So, yeah, I mean, I think we should look to be bold. And, you know, and what do you think about some of these ideas about social media, AI, and how that, instead of distracting us from each other in the arts, can help connect us to the arts in more efficacious ways?
I'm just trying to be courteous.
No, you're the boss. Huh?
Yeah, that's a huge topic to take on, especially now when you got Doge, is that how I pronounce it? Doge, and all sorts of AI takeover attempt from the top down where they're trying to destroy the federal government while trying to control us through technology. Like, this is really happening in real time, you know, with the billionaires, right-wing tech elites leading the way. So to counter that, yes, it's us, right? It's us to de-link, it's us to be, you know, to spur a creative revolution. But I'll be honest, I don't have right now a clear solution or an answer to the moment, because it's just too overwhelming of what's happening all around us. And the left, the progressives, we're so busy playing defense, we haven't come up with the real blueprint of what the clear solution is to improve on the administrative state, which is the right wing is trying to replace with the technological state. And, you know, so we need to come up with the real plan. I think what you're talking about speaks to that, about connecting on a different level instead of being part of an extractive model where we're being preyed upon by AI machines at the top. How do we empower that kind of a movement? I don't know, but once we all do, I think we'll be in a better place.
It might have to be a topic for a future panel. I think we do have time, I think, maybe to take one last question. I did already call on somebody over here, so go right ahead. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm Patricia Walsh. I'm a public art consultant, artist, and a board member of Arts Mid-Hudson, all the way from Poughkeepsie. I just want to make two kind of quick points. One to the gentleman in the middle. When you talk about percent for art programs, just so you know, 25 other states already have it. It's a pretty common practice. Washington does amazing work in this area. Maryland, Hawaii was one of the first to adapt it. So there's definitely resources and research out there to help support that. I'd also argue to look at like what Vermont's been doing. They have a collaboration from a state and a private sector crowdfunding agency that helps collaborate together to provide placemaking opportunities for local communities that incorporates the arts. So there's different ways to think about the way funding can operate, both at the state level and in collaboration with private sector. And then the second point I want to make is just talking about all this conversation around planning and some of the things I've sort of heard from this panel already, is the conversation around, as you go through planning and thinking about where you want to go and what the options are, thinking about policy audits. What's out there, what are the policies that are getting in the way of things, and what are the policies that maybe we're not thinking of, that are maybe they're supportive of the arts? Or what are the policies that we need in addition to all that? So it's a growing trend in the planning field. I work a lot with a lot of planners, and it's something that seems to be growing as well. So just thinking about that as an opportunity to think about where can we find things that are being left on the table and where our next steps can go. So, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I think we have time for one last question, so I'll take it right over here.
Hi, this isn't a question, it's a thank you. My name is Elizabeth Reese, and I work in Troy, New York at the Art Center of the Capital Region. And I want to thank the state for amazing funding to help our public art program, where we've been able to put murals all through Troy that tell amazing stories of the people who live there. And as we started this talk about the national agenda and how it may impact us, I'm seeing it every day. So in the last couple of years, and more increasingly, I've had to clean up derogatory graffiti on our murals that are telling great stories of all of us. And I'm using state funding to make the murals, and I'm using state funding to clean up the murals. So I want to thank you for your really hard work every day of putting forward this great state of New York. I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I believe in what we do, and I believe that we can continue to do great work, especially given what we're facing in a national level. You guys are going to get really tired. I know that, and I just want to say thank you.
Liz, you closed us out perfectly. Took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, gentlemen, thank you so much for your great work, for being here with us today, for digging into these topics. And we so appreciate your time. One more round of applause for amazing elected officials. Thank you so much, gentlemen.